But there is also the matter of brand new architects and the classic symptoms of a broken spirit, a title I am never going to remember for as long as I live, and I listen to Nile.
I mean, like, it's kind of where they're going with their titles now, isn't it? Like,
yeah, but
for those that wish to exist.
What's the word classic doing there? Just call it the symptom of a broken spirit. You're not adding anything by putting another letter into your acronym. But anyway, a little over a year and a half ago, we got Architects' 9th album, For Those That Wish to Exist, which is, I think that's a sentence that makes sense for as much as it's similar length. They brought with it a massive change in the kind of music Architects were making. A lot of people didn't like it and made their voices heard as such. The album was, though, critically and commercially, a great success. It became their first number one record in the UK and makes them bigger than they ever have been. I really, really like that record, honestly. Like, it was right close to breaking into my top 20 last year, which you've got to remember, I've not been like the biggest diehard Architects fan throughout their whole existence. I would definitely have that in my top 5 Architects albums, if not top 3. Like, I thought it was a much, much better and more natural swing for them into kind of like more melodic territory that they felt like they were ready to take now at that stage in their career.
Yeah, I mean, it was in my top 20. I think that album is fantastic. Like, again, I love Architects. They're one of my favourite bands, so I was ready to, and I was ready to go over the change, and it felt the right time for it. It felt like a natural move. Didn't feel like a jarring kind of like we're doing something totally different now. Yeah, it's great, and the orchestral version they released later that year is like making that album even better. Like, so well into what Architects are doing now.
Yeah, I think one of the important things about that record is it felt like it was getting out of painting themselves into a corner, maybe, where the sound that they'd done across, particularly that 3-album run that people talk about in the middle of the 2010s, had kind of reached a point where it was ready to turn into something else. And so I think that was the correct record to make in terms of not painting yourself into a corner like that, which I think is worth remembering when we look at maybe what this one is made up with, and maybe that needs to be considered again. Because it's always striking nowadays when you kind of get another one so soon, because we've had plenty of discussion in the lead up to this record of one of the great, wonders of the natural world of the modern era, going out and watching the migration of metalcore fans trying to make sense of their favourite bands changing. They seem to have more trouble with it today than any other subset of rock fans. But that's not just to say that, there were no reasonable concerns to be had here, because, the singles we were getting from this, my feeling with them is that For Those That Wish to Exist was a sweet spot of hitting something that was fucking massive while still feeling unmistakably Architects and kind of true to what they had been. The singles from this, when listening to them as kind of standalone songs, felt perhaps a step too far.
Yeah, it's sort of like, I mean, the singles, like, I think the vocal melodies in particular felt like maybe they were trying to sort of, they felt like they were like kind of regurgitating and like being a bit formulaic by Architect standards at this point. I still liked the singles in this. Like, again, I think there is more to them than just kind of like more melodic Architects. Again, that there is, I think musically this album makes more interesting decisions, but it does feel like perhaps it was kind of like we're kind of pushing out another album that is not, that kind of feels like For Those That Wish to Exist plus, really, rather than kind of like it's a new cohesive album with its own identity.
It's a tough line to walk, because when we've had conversations about bands like this, we do tend to ridicule and poke fun kind of as a bit, like the fans who go utterly fucking mental about it. But there is legitimacy to the idea of, a band simplifying their sound to such a degree that they lose the magic of what was once there. We've all got bands like that. And as much as we like to take the side of the artists here who, more often than not, in cases like Architects or Partway Drive or even Bring Me, don't seem to be doing it totally cynically. And it does come from a place of like having done the more extreme stuff and then aging into a place where songs and melody are paramount. This album, to me, sounds like people who have had fun playing Animals live and have like collectively fastened onto that as like the highlight of their live set, because practically this entire album follows that kind of formula. The 4/4 crunching, stomping kind of power gate over anything else. I like that thing. I think Architects are quite good at it. Animals is indeed a fucking powerhouse live if you've managed to see it. I think this album makes For Those That Wish to Exist retrospectively look like an Opeth record.
Yeah, this is trimming a lot of the kind of like, I don't say trimming the fat, but this is really kind of like honing in on one part of For Those Wish and kind of running with that. And like, I do agree with you when I say like I do feel for fans, because again, like I've had that band, but it's just react normally to it is always why I kind of like side with the eyes.
Just be normal.
But it literally is. It's the kind of like, it's the, I'm going to listen to this album once and make my mind up on it, and then just dig down in that position and just give my knee-jerk reaction. Like, because, let's be honest, that's what Tomorrow is going to be. Is everyone's going to give it one listen, give their knee-jerk reaction either like, oh, I hate it 'cause it's different, or the people who hold this band a bit too preciously, like, defending it rapidly and not actually kind of, like, taking into account the things that, because again, this album does things right. I think it's the first Architects album in a while that I'm going like, there's a few things this one does wrong. Like, so, yeah, it's kind of just going to be one of those albums that just, you're going to need to properly discuss and kind of get into the ins and outs of it as to why it's a success and failure in different ways.
I quite enjoy having this album on, right? Like, just fundamentally in terms of, like, am I having a fairly good time listening to the album? Yeah. The core thing that it does is a good one. Architects have, from Holy Hell to For Those That Wish to Exist to this, they've gotten really good at just the crunchy arena metal banger, haven't they?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, again, this one adding that kind of more industrial flavour, again, it just stops it from feeling too familiar, but yeah, at their core, they are good at writing big, crunchy arena metal banger. Like, again, a lot of it's looked in that 4/4 kind of thing with the bursts of pace to kind of like punctuate things or change things up a bit, but it is, you know, they have an idea on this one that they are hammering in.
What the last album had, though, and why I was always resistant to the people who, you know, this time 18 months ago were going, oh my god, Architects have sold out, or whatever. There were some complaints about it being 15 tracks long, but I do think there is major variety in that record. Like, the highlights in that record veer from lavish orchestral pieces like Dead Butterflies through to Simon Neil squawking like a psychopathic chicken. And in between, there's just, you know, bangers like Meteor and Black Lungs, more kind of destructive classic Architect stuff like Discourse is Dead,
yeah.
Some of the electronic leaning stuff on like An Ordinary Extinction. For all the talk of that being more straightforward, it's an extremely musical record that I think you gave you a lot to chew on. This is the most homogenous Architects album since they were a mathcore band, if not ever.
Yeah, like, there's a reason you could do a grand orchestral version of For Those That Wish to Exist. You couldn't do that with this album. It doesn't have the scope to it to add this, like, stunning orchestral parts to the songs.
This album is shockingly one note. And it is a satisfying note. But it's definitely one, I think, that is lessened for having it hit over and over again, and that they do hit most successfully a few times, and then the rest all seem like lesser versions of that thing that are kind of destined to be forgotten.
I kind of disagree. Like, I don't think it's one note, but it has the least amount of strings to its bow, definitely. Like, because like the sort of opening 1-2 of Deep Fake and Tear Gas, I think kind of sums up the core of this album, that they are very similar, like I say, stompy, industrial metal bangers that have like big riff bit, kind of like big chorus with very recognisable Sam Carter melodies that, again, you could kind of like, some of them you can trace back to the last album as well. I think there's crossover there. They've got the breakdowns, they've kind of got like bits where they'll kind of shoot off in a burst of pace. And that's what a lot of this album is. I think there are other songs that are more interesting, that do kind of like serve as a bit of a shake-up, but they are kind of like, they're a bit scattered.
Yeah, well, honestly, like when we do these kind of standalone Hyperblast reviews for like a massive record that's coming out for a week, normally there's like so much to say about it. Like when we do Slipknot or fucking, you know, a mental fucking Muse record or whatever, we're going for ages. This has the least of the ones that we've done, to me, because most of the songs just kind of sound the same. I'm curious, what are the ones that you feel are kind of the more left turns on it?
I think When We Were Young actually kind of does stand out a little bit more in the record, because it's a bit more punky. I think that like that kind of edge of it comes through a bit more. It does still on the chorus kind of lock into that. The two that really stand out for me come near the end of the record with A New Moral Low Ground, which I think is really great, and Be Very Afraid, which like that the guy's closing track is going to get the most people talking, I think, because it is.
I think
the rager.
Be Very Afraid. I think the structuring of the record almost kind of puts that as like slightly aside from it, because when you are going through the album, like what's that, track 11, the first 10 songs, I think, like they I guess if you were to look into kind of a direction for the album, this has, I think, consciously traded out the kind of Abbey Road stuff for doubling down twice as hard on the electronics, right? Which I wonder if anyway it's kind of thematic, because that record's focus on like, you know, the environment and the climate crisis and having this like sweeping, almost lamenting kind of organic nature to it. This one's more around kind of the internet and modern living and stuff, so it's the sound sort of, you know, shifts to go with it. But anyway, we had this theory of this maybe being like Architect's like industrial metal record, and that's really panned out because most of the songs have like a huge synth or electronic element to them, which is pretty cool.
I think, again, Burn Down My House is another one which I think differs slightly, because it's a bit more like, it's less than that kind of 4/4 stomp, it's a bit more atmospheric and kind of dreary and downcast. The sort of the heavily reverb vocals, that's one of the more interesting turns. But those are like, I guess, a few songs, whereas like the majority of it does kind of like, there's particular ones like Doom Scrolling, kind of just, that's one that like totally passes me by, because it's just kind of like, you are doing something you've done on the record. Like,
you mentioned what was it, a new moral ground or something. That song kind of goes over my head, but I really like Doom Scrolling. So I think that there'll probably be, you know, take for yourself like which one, which versions of the formula happen to hit you in a particular place, because it's sort of variations of the same thing generally. I mean, I do think it's time to acknowledge how influential Muse's riffing and guitar tone can be on a lot of like this generation of bands, because we know
Muse and Rammstein, like
but we know Architects are pals with Royal Blood, and both of those are plug-in right into Matt Bellamy's guitar tone on records like this, and now they're taking the synth to match. Like Spit the Bone has a kind of gallop that is like super Muse. I just wish they made me feel like it's Halloween, but I think that's definitely there. Deep Fake, straight from the start, that little synth line given way to like just demolish a riff. Cool, has that like electronic whirring around the breakdowns. Obviously Tear Gas is literally just Rammstein with a Chester Bennington chorus, and I love Rammstein, and I can't say I don't think that riff slams, and when the hook hits, it is massive.
And it's also, I'd say it's got like Tear Gas as well has that 9 Inch Nails verse as well. Like that's one where you can really feel the most of their influences. You are spot on with the Muse thing on Spit the Bone, because it's got that bounce and that kind of like dance club Muse kind of like dance rock banger, the thing that Muse can do really well when they are on it. And that is what Spit the Bone is. Like, again, I think that song's actually quite fun. I mean, like Dan's drumming on it is like gives a lot of bounce to it and a lot of like the swing in it. I mean, his drumming is actually kind of a bit more standouts from him in some way. He's kind of like being less kind of like doing the sort of the tech metal, genty regimented stuff and playing around a bit more on a few songs. But it's little bits here and there, really. Yeah,
I agree as well. Even though it seems it was like the first taste of what direction this album would be going in. I do think When We Were Young still sort of jumps out in the track list for just being a good version of it. Like, because the riff is the best riff on the album by a mile. And when Sam, you know, brings it in with just that, that's the one that stands out as them hitting that kind of like Animals type mark that they're setting for themselves, just in the kind of the impact of it. Sam has slipped really comfortably into a particular pocket of hook on this album, which is basically the Black Lungs template from the last album. That kind of Architects chorus, less, you know, the real piercing fucking going for it thing that I still loved on that record on something like An Ordinary Extinction or whatever, and instead you're getting more variations of the sort of slightly more poppy Black Lungs kind of variant, which I think it makes it very hummable as you go through the record. Like, you know, the fistful of fucking gold on Deep Fake, really, really good one. The We Fell in Love with the Death Machine on Living and Killing Us, really good. I do really like the chorus in Doom Scrolling as well. And I did think that, again, one of the choruses that sort of, I agree, slightly stood out in a different way was Burn Down My House, which has that kind of like different spin of that sort of more slow, woozy kind of pop there.
Yeah.
The problem is, it's a whole album of Animals riffs and Black Lungs choruses, and they're not topping those songs, and they are having so little in the way of variation or invention. Again, for me, I think Doom Scrolling is a very good version of that song. The run of like 3 songs that come afterwards, for me, are like total fine would have cut them off the last record versions of the same kind of song. And that's kind of the extent of the dynamic within this record. And while, like I'm saying, it's kind of hummable as you're going through it, I come out of it, and there's only really 3 or 4 that I can remember at any given moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think the thing with this album is it's still consistently good. I don't necessarily think any of those songs in isolation are bad. Like again, I kind of picked up Doom Scrolling as one that I kind of glossed over, but I think it's because there is quite a lot of that on the record that it kind of just sort of hits me. Like I said, it hits a consistently good Mark album with like moments of like being really good, but it just I'm glad this is 11 songs. Like I'm really glad this is 11 songs. I think if this was longer than it is, I would be feeling a lot more weary about it coming out of it, because I think because it kind of is just in and out without taking up too much time. It's quite like to the point. I can go along with it and still come out being like, yep, cool. And you know, when Be Very Afraid hits the end and you kind of get like, oh, here's that kind of raging like metalcore burst at the end. Cool, that's a fun way to end it.
That was the thing. When that fast drum fill comes at the start of Be Very Afraid, which is the very last song on the record, I was so excited and relieved. I was like, oh my god, because it wasn't an 11th song of do-do-do, do-do-do, do-do-do. Like, it hit me so like, oh my god, the biggest deviation on the record is just a slightly faster Architect song, and it feels fucking massive because you've had 10 songs of them basically, you know, trying to do Sonna. And it reminds me of criticisms that people had with Hail to the King by Avenged Sevenfold in terms of being way too one-pace, uncreative, and close to ripping off either themselves or other bands too often. Except I think Hail to the King, which I've always defended, would go closer to the For Those That Wish to Exist route again, because at least there's a real identity to each individual song in that track list with a broader range of ideas. And Rammstein, again, a band that Architects are increasingly like modelling their style of groove after here, and a band who people who haven't listened very much say do all the same thing. Look how fucking creative that band's brand new record is, and how many different flavours it gives you. I'm not saying this is a bad record, because like I said, I have a decent time with it on, but I think Architects could do with just being reminded of that, even in their bands they're trying to ape.
So I think that's the other thing, because like there are almost every song has at least one moment you kind of go like, oh, that's a cool little idea and change up, but it's kind of it's fleeting. It's kind of like Born Again Pessimist has this like glitchy electronic sort of shift in the middle where it kind of drops the pace out a bit and like goes a bit more atmospheric, and it's like, oh cool, and then it slits back into that 4/4 stompy chorus, and it's kind of like, so you kind of just that as that one moment without kind of really further elaborating. And I'm like, there's clearly still the ideas and the invention there, but they're kind of like fragments of these quite regimented songs otherwise. I don't know if they kind of retreat back into sort of a safety of these, like having, like say, enjoying the sort of the stompy 4/4 thing and wanting them the songs that they can just, you know, take out into arenas with Biffy Clyro at the moment. Like, so
you can do that thing, but don't do it on every single song. Like even Rammstein don't do it on every single song.
The songs have that kind of hint of like, oh, there's something more interesting there, but it's the fact that it's always like it's there and then it's retreating back into that formula.
Yeah, like I think this album is good at what it does, right? Like it's a bunch of good songwriters. It's got loads of big melodies in it that will sound big live. If this turns out to be like the record where they decide to go, all right, 40 minutes of straight up stomping bangers and we'll switch it up again next time, then I'm sure it will have quite a little, you know, a nice spot in their catalogue. I mean, they're about to go out supporting Biffy Clyro, right? Yeah,
that's what I said, that taking these songs in arenas with Biffy Clyro, this feels like the right spot to have this kind of material, this more immediate, stompy, arena-ready material. So, like, perhaps there's kind of, again, feelings like that have coloured the direction of this album. But I think where they go next is important. Yeah, I just think after a couple records of kind of breaking outside of the box of what Architects maybe had sort of found themselves in, this album feels like they've just locked themselves inside another box to me. So, I mean, unfortunately, they would not be getting a consecutive number one because Taylor Swift exists this time. Yeah.
But, good luck anyway to him. Architects, the classic symptoms of a broken spirit.